Hello everyone, and welcome to my presentation about using GitOps with Azure Container Apps. The agenda for today will be me presenting who I am, going through what GitOps is, and then what Container Apps is. After that, we'll take a look at the GitOps engine for Container Apps and a demo, and of course a few ending remarks at the end. This presentation is recorded in English, but I will hold it in Swedish on Wednesday. I'm recording it for my coworkers who's not able to attend, as well as for everyone on LinkedIn and YouTube, of course. My name is Simon Gottschlag. I'm the CTO at Zenit, and I have quite a few passions in life, but books, running, and technology are three big ones. I was adding a couple of pictures of my wife and my kids, but my wife told me that the picture of her crossing her eyes wasn't that nice to show everyone, so I skipped them. I've been working at Zenit for 13 years and 3 months as of today, and I've been doing a lot of different things over the years, but nowadays I'm focusing on developer experience and helping my coworkers build and expand our Kubernetes framework and the offering we have to customers around Kubernetes. All right, what is GitOps? We've heard a lot of things about GitOps over the years, and there is now something called Open GitOps, which came from the GitOps working group I think it was the CNCF community who created it. But they've come up with 4 principles that's the important things for GitOps. The first principle is that a system managed by GitOps must have its desired state expressed declaratively, and that usually means having perhaps YAML files for Kubernetes, but it can mean a lot of other things as well. In my case, I'm trying to configure Azure infrastructure declaratively in the same way. It must be versioned and immutable. The desired state is stored in a way that enforces immutability, versioning, and retains a complete version history. And that usually means using Git. But they actually don't enforce you to use Git. So if you're that kind of person that likes things like SVN, that should be fine as well. Perhaps not as easy to work with when it comes to coding. I'm not sure how easy it is to code Go for SVN. I haven't tried it myself. It should be pulled automatically. Software agents automatically pull the desired state declarations from the source. And this is, at least from my point of view, one of the most important parts. So instead of us pushing to the system connects to the Git repository or the version controller and pulls it, and it does it automatically, most likely on a schedule. And the fourth principle, continuously reconciled. So the software agents continuously observe the actual system state and attempts to apply the desired state. In Kubernetes, this is quite easy, but it's not as easy in every system. But the important part here is that if we remove something, it will actually be removed from the system as well. I've tried to paint a picture of how it looks. In this case, we can see the declarative configuration. Usually it's YAML for Kubernetes, but it could be anything. It's stored in a version control in an immutable way, and it's pulled automatically by the software agent and continuously reconciled, making sure that all the changes in the version control is applied to the system. So the benefits of GitOps, there are quite a few, but the main thing that's really nice is everything is in version control. The second thing is that now the version control, or perhaps the GitHub or Azure DevOps, doesn't actually have to store the credentials for the system you're deploying to, but the system itself will have credentials to the configuration. We're moving away from pushing out from our CI/CD system to the system, and we're instead pulling it from the system itself. Now, automation is about working with a version control. Instead of having to manipulate the system, you manipulate the version control. You're editing files, and that's most of the automation you have to do. You have to work with Git instead of working with that specific system. And multi-region is as easy as pointing multiple software agents to the same version control. That means that if we have 2 Kubernetes clusters or 2 container apps managed environments, these systems can now point to the same Git repository and pull that configuration into themselves. This also makes it a lot easier to do things like blue-green for clusters. All right, what is container apps? Deploy containerized apps without managing complex infrastructure. Write code using your preferred programming language or framework and build microservices with full support for distributed application runtime, or dapr. Scale dynamically based on HTTP traffic or events powered by Kubernetes event-driven autoscaling, or KEDA. I usually say that container apps is serverless Kubernetes. So we have Kubernetes in the background, but we do not have access to the Kubernetes APIs. So we only have access to a limited subset of these APIs. And instead of calling it a deployment, we now call it a container app. So when you create your first container app, you have to create a managed environment, and the managed environment can contain multiple container apps, and each container app can have multiple revisions, and these revisions can, if you want to, be running at the same time. Container apps comes with dapr from the beginning, which makes it really easy to integrate with data sources like Postgres, Cosmos DB, MongoDB, but it also integrates with Service Bus and other kinds of message queues and commit logs. There are like 4 main ways of using it, but in this case we have a couple of example scenarios. The first one is a public API endpoint where you send different amounts of traffic to the different revisions, and container apps makes it possible to have an ingress or make your endpoints public in a really easy manner. The second one is background processing. You want to run some kind of container in the background and perhaps scale it based on the CPU or memory load. And of course, in the first one, we can scale the different revisions based on the number of HTTP requests. The third one is event-driven processing, which means you can scale the container app based on the amount of messages you have in a queue. And the last scenario is making it possible to you have service-to-service communication between them using Dapper. GitOps engine for container apps, or as my colleague came up with the great name, Ask a Git. It's GitOps for container apps, and you can call it a GitOps engine for Azure container apps. It's an open source project which you can find on Senate AB's GitHub page. The main idea is that you create two resource groups in Azure. One you call platform and one you call tenant. The platform will contain the managed environment and the Ask a Git container app. And this container app will connect to a Git repository, and it will reconcile this Git repository into the tenant resource group. The tenant resource group also contains a container registry and an Azure Key Vault. It's also possible to have multiple regions set up. So you can have two regions with one platform each and one tenant each, but they can synchronize the same apps. And we also have the functionality to filter what apps should be synchronized to what region. A couple of features. So of course we're able to synchronize a Git repository, but we can also choose what folder in that Git repository to synchronize. That makes it possible that we can have a dev folder, a QA folder, and a prod folder as an example. And we can have one Ask a Git container app running for each of the different environments. We've built a CLI that makes it possible to trigger a synchronization, and we are using Service Bus to actually communicate to the Ask a Git pod that it should initialize new reconciliation. We can populate the container app's secrets from Azure Key Vault, which isn't possible without Ask a Git. We're also able to populate the container app's registries with the default registry credentials, and you're actually able to use managed service identity for container apps to connect to a registry, but I haven't tested it myself, but I think it's quite hard to get like another container registry than Azure Container Registry to actually work using that. We're also able to send notifications to the Git commit. That means the green checkbox in GitHub and Azure DevOps. And we're able to use that using another tool we call GitOps Promotion. We're able to filter locations, and that means that if we have multiple regions connected to the same repository, we can specify what a specific app, what regions a specific app should be located in. By default, it will be in all of them. The Ask a Git container app is also able to push its own metrics to Azure Monitor. And we also have the functionality to replace the image tag, which makes it possible to easily swap out what version of the specific container image you're using. Alright, seeing is believing, a demo. Wow, such demo, much amaze. GitOps. Alright. So in this case, we have 6 resource groups set up. We have 3 platforms and 3 tenants. Everything is in the same subscription, and the platform for dev contains the ASCII-Git pod, the managed environment, a service bus, a VNet, and a log analytics workspace. The same thing goes for the production environment or the production platform, and the same goes for the QA. When we look at the tenant, we have the container registry and the key vault, and in this case we have one container app deployed. It's called pod info. If we look at the QA tenant, we see the same, and if we look at the prod, we see the same. In this case, we could go into the pod info in dev, and we can browse it. And let's go back and do the same for QA. And the same for production. We can see dev up and running, publicly available, QA the same, and production as well. Now we're going to make a change to pod info. So let's go in and change the color. Let's make it blue. We're committing it. And we're pushing it. Now we've made a change to the application. If we go to the GitOps repository, we can see that we have 3 folders here: dev, QA, and production. If we go into dev, we have the podinfo.yaml. In here, we can see that we have a specific image that is replacing the image tag on the template. This one will be changed automatically as soon as the build of the podinfo container image is finished. We should see that the podinfo container is now building. It should take a few minutes. As soon as it's done, we should see another pipeline triggering. It's called new apps podinfo, and it will push the container image that's created in this stage to the container registries. So it will be pushed to dev, QA, and production container registries. You could do that to just one of them if you wanted and use the same for all of them. In this case, I'm using one container registry for each environment. And if we look at an older builder, the first step is pushing the image to each environment. And then we run the GitOps promotion. And GitOps promotion creates a new pull request to the GitOps repository with the latest version of the image. So now we can see the new apps pod info is running, and it's queued, so it will start in a few seconds. Yeah, there we go. And it's downloading the container artifact from the previous stage. It logs on to Azure Container Registry, and then it pushes it. The GitOps promotion tool is also open source, and you can find it on our GitHub. It's using the Flux CD image automation controller logic to find the specific image policy, and it will replace the value where it can find this image policy. And it will only do it to the dev environment. And when it has completed with this change to the dev environment, it will start a promotion, which is another pipeline that will create a pull request for the QA environment. And here we can see that we have 3 environments configured, where it should merge automatically to dev and QA, and QA will only be merged if the dev environment has sent a Git notification that it's successful. But the production environment won't auto-merge in this case. So we should now be able to go into pull requests and see that we had a new one. Let's check. So it updated from the previous version to the new version, and it merged automatically. We can now see that we have a new version here. We should also be able to see that the dev environment is really blue. If we go back, we should be able to see, if we're fast, that we have an active one for the QA, which is set to autocomplete. And if the status check finishes, it will merge it as well. And there it merged. Just to show you, what is this check looking at? It's looking at this one, and it's looking specifically at if apps dev was successfully reconciled. So QA looks at dev, prod looks at QA. And we should now see that the QA environment has the latest version, and perhaps soon we should see that it's blue as well. And now the last step is the GitOps promotion tool will create a pull request for the production environment, but we set it to manual. So we can see that the status check has completed, and I can now merge this myself. So right now it's still the old color. We complete it. We should now see that all of them have the same version. And we also have a tool called ASCII-Git trigger, or a pipeline called ASCII-Git trigger. And this one is just, I use it for demo purposes, but it actually sends a trigger notification to ask-a-git, making sure that ask-a-git triggers earlier than its specified interval. And in this case, I'm just sending it to each of the service buses that it should trigger. And we should now be able to see that it's blue. I hope you enjoyed that demo, and we'll just do a few ending remarks. And as always, I do always recommend books. I do listen to a lot of audiobooks myself, and the Phoenix Project by Gene Kim is based on Elijah Goldratt's The Goal, and so is Rolling Rocks Downhill by Clark Shing. All of these books are great to help you understand concepts like lean manufacturing, DevOps, and Agile. I highly recommend all of them. And of course we should end with a quote, and this one is one I use a lot of the time. There is only one way to eat an elephant, a bite at a time. And I found out that it was Desmond Tutu who said it, which I didn't know before writing this presentation. Alright, that's it. Thank you for listening to me. Bye.